And good evening. And welcome back for those who enjoyed our fellowship luncheon this afternoon. Glad that most of you were able to partake of that. If not, maybe try to consider us next time around with our once a month get togethers. A couple of other side notes. I forgot to tell David that Caden will have a procedure tomorrow in Oklahoma City at about 6 a.m. So you may be thinking and praying for him. And then I don't know if many of you got to meet Dottie. She kind of sits back Sunday morning, about midway back, kind of where Pat is sitting over to the right of where actually left of Pat. She has been visiting for quite some time, and then she went away for several months to go see her sisters. But she's had bladder cancer that has been in remission for about 4 years or so, and so that has come back, and so she is going to start taking treatments again starting on Tuesday. And so I told her that we'd be praying for her, so you'd be considering her as well. Got a really kind of out of the box kind of a sermon this evening, kind of save these kind of for the evening crowd, I guess. And just it's different. I don't really just kind of one idea spurred on another, getting this together, because I've got an interesting question for you this evening. If someone you knew had been raised from the dead, and you really did believe or want to believe it, and think it really was them, what would it take for you to really believe it was real? Say seeing is believing, and we can get off into Thomas's, which we're not, because he didn't believe without seeing. He says, seeing, I must see it in order to believe. He put a condition on his belief about a resurrection. Of anybody. That's not something that's a common everyday occurrence, and especially we accept it. Oh yeah, Jesus rose from the dead. It was a resurrection, but we kind of pass that off with a greater faith that we have, but just really believing. And is seeing believing. Caleb and I and Joshua are talking about this on the way over here tonight, and Caleb reminded me of something we saw that we thought was real that was not. And it was a hologram. It was actually at Abraham Lincoln's Presidential Library. They have a three-dimensional hologram behind glass, and there's all kinds of different things, but he is the moderator and he's the librarian, and he came in and introduced himself from the very beginning, and you did not know he was real until he disappeared at the end. And I remember the whole audience was taken back by that. It was like a gasp that we cannot believe we've just been duped into really interacting with a hologram. It was not real. He was not real. Everything else you kind of thought was special effects, and you knew it was special effects. Things with smoke and came down and different things, but he walked in and we thought was going to walk out, and it was just there and gone in a poof of a hologram. And so really seeing was believing to a point, and so that made it real for a while. I want you to think of someone in your mind right now. What proof would you need? Would you first have to pinch yourself, kind of like in the movies, to make sure that you weren't dreaming? Because you think this is really an impossibility. You think about it. Think about a resurrected body, not just something that we hear and accept with Jesus Christ. Would you think that what you were seeing was not maybe a dream, but maybe was a ghost? It's been said about that when they were praying for Peter, remember? They said, well, that's his angel. Now, I don't know what that means. An angel to represent Peter, that says he's Peter, that looks like Peter. I don't understand, but they just maybe gravitated to those effects. Even though you had never seen, or nor I have seen a resurrection, it would really be hard for our minds to wrap around the concept. But we're not alone. The biggest reason why we can't believe that someone could be raised from the dead is because it doesn't happen. And if we don't see it ever happen, then how can we kind of put it in any kind of comparisons? Because it doesn't. We wouldn't believe it. There are examples of it finding it hard to believe that we will use in a moment. And as long as the world keeps turning and everything remains the same, meaning life itself, people are born, they live, they die, that's it. That's stated over in 2 Peter 3 and 4, which talks about some of those expectations concerning the Lord's return. We're kind of impatient with it. It says, they will say, where is this coming he promised? Ever since our ancestors died, everything goes on as it has since the beginning of creation. It's kind of life cycles. We celebrate when people have newborn babies, and we've had some of those announcements recently, and we all gravitate to the immediate pictures that ensue after that event. And then sadly, as we had another passing of a loved one that we know that we'll have this week. See, our minds find it hard to relate or comprehend such a subject as a resurrection, but yet the crux of our whole belief is based on that. Because if Christ did not rise, then there is no hope for any of us. And we'll get to that message as well, because none of us have ever seen or witnessed one. It's always amazing. You've heard of someone that's told of someone that said that they know someone that was raised from the dead. Now, that really goes into third-party acceptance of that, but we all have plenty. I know that many of you, myself included, have been to plenty of funerals, I suppose, over our lifetime. And we know for a fact that dead is dead. They're not coming back. It's a finality. It's a closure. A friend of mine had mentioned before, which encouraged me in my faith. I've talked to him about before. His family was in the funeral business. His dad was a mortician, and actually his father ran the business for many years. And I remember commenting about these so-called faith healers that claimed that they had someone raised from the dead. He always said, I would love for them to do a body that I worked on, because I would know for a fact. I embalmed them. There is no way that you can convince me that this is nothing but a miracle, because he knows the death process. And nothing but a true miracle of God could do something like we're all hoping that one day we arise with our hope. And none of the ones that we have been to have ever come back. So what would it take? Maybe you want to touch them to see if they are real. Get that warm body temperature flowing through the body, and that is understandable. Maybe take a pulse. We are a see, touch, feel, and experience kind of people with all of the senses that go within a lifetime. But I want us to visit such occasion found in the Bible to kind of help us with this as well concerning Jesus and his resurrection, even though this had been prophesied hundreds of years before his birth. What was to take place? You understand Jesus' frustration when he says that, basically they weren't understanding that it was really going to be a resurrection. Even when he says that you to destroy this temple in 3 days and I will rise it up again. They didn't understand what that meant. They said, you mean the literal temple? I mean, you know how long it took for them to build that? No, this temple. You are the temple of God. And we understand that under our understanding today, but they really had problems wrestling with this. Now, we will look into Luke's findings. Now, Luke, you remember, is our historian in the group. And what did Luke do? He interviewed quite a few people. He wrote and documented from so many eyewitnesses to compile the story of Jesus. And we know the story of Jesus were written down so that what? We might believe. John 20 and 31. So if you want to open your Bibles to Luke, the 24th chapter, we'll kind of look into this a little bit. If you don't have a Bible with you, there should be one in the middle of the pew for you. The end of this writing and after the resurrection is right before his ascension. He is going to leave. So let's start with verse 13. And behold, two of them were going that very day to the village Emmaus, which was about 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they were talking with each other about all these things which had taken place. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself approached and began traveling with them. But their eyes were prevented from recognizing him. It's an interesting little fact. We really don't have much more to go on, but that we just understand that they don't know him to be Jesus. And he said to them, what are these words that you are exchanging with one another as you are walking? And they stood still, looking sad. One of them, named Cleopas, answered and said to him, are you the only one visiting Jerusalem and unaware of the things which had happened here in these days? It's just, what rock have you been living under? What kind of box have you been? Don't you understand that they just crucified this Jesus? And that was a big thing. This is huge. Kind of like, are you the last person to know this information? And he said to them, what things? And he said to them, the things about Jesus, the Nazarene, who is a prophet, mighty in deed and word in the sight of God and all the people, and how the chief priests and our rulers delivered him to the sentence of death and crucified him. But we were hoping that he was going to redeem Israel. Indeed, besides all this, it is the third day since these things happened. Now, we're going to stop here for just a quick second and take a look at some things. I want to look at, first off, the system of the people during this day and age. And I understand what we understand about death is the point of finality. For them, it wasn't immediate. It actually came in a couple of days. And the same was shown and illustrated with a resurrection by a name Lazarus. When Christ raised him from the tomb, if you remember that story, this count as well, notice that they said, in this case, they were hoping. What were they hoping? They were holding out for the idea that he was going to redeem Israel. That's the whole point. He's going to sit back on the kingdom, the king of David. He is going to rule, and we're going to rule, and that's how it's going to be. But then when they kill him and he dies, that upsets the plan. That's not going to happen. They're not going to be made a great nation. He will not be king, and they be his subjects to rule over the Romans, which they thought were coming. And notice that it says, besides all this, now he is gone, and it is the third day. And therefore saying it's kind of the past, a point of no return. It's too late. Why? Just like it was too late for Lazarus. You know, Jesus purposely planned a delayed appointment. They said, if he's sick, we need to go to him. He says he's asleep. Well, if he's asleep, he will arise. No, he's dead. They didn't understand what they were going back for. But Jesus knew for that other story. He's dead 3 days. He's stinking. It's too late, Jesus. Too late. You being the Son of God, can you imagine that? Telling the Son of God that he's too late? Something that, everything that he's done up to this point, but still too late. But as he in that dialogue would tell Mary and Martha that he is the life. He is life. Now, the significance of 3 days, whether we really realize it or not, because we aren't in the customs of those days, according to various Jewish sources and folk traditions, up through the medieval period, they took this belief of this 3 days all the way through medieval times, which gets a little bit closer to our time. So they even took it way past Christ. There is a gradual transition from physical death to an afterlife in which the body and spirit remain connected to one another in some way. They couldn't explain it, either through a resurrection or immortality of the soul. And according to those rabbinic folklores, the transition from death to life actually begins 3 days after death, when the soul is believed to hover over the grave, hoping to be restored to the body. Now you can understand why people believe that mom and dad can, see what's going on after they've passed, and they kind of hover around and kind of look at. It says the dead know nothing under the sun. They don't have no knowledge to what's going on afterwards. But see, their belief was that the soul really yearned to be back in the body, and whether they had someone they thought was dead and maybe they thought were buried and then they came to life. We have still some of those, as long as they're not embalmed. They thought they were on a gurney and then all of a sudden a pulse came. We have some of those stories. Well, they had those, and they really believed that the soul had about a 3-day period of wanting to reconnect with the body, and if it did, it would happen. But after that, for some reason, that mass, now you understand the Lazarus story a little bit better. Maybe you understand why Jesus, this magical 3 days of waiting, because dead is dead at that point. And no wonder they told Jesus it was too late. So this is why they mentioned the 3 days. And they said, besides, as they're going along, it says it's already been past 3 days. So all of our hopes are dashed about him redeeming Israel. And this belief had been passed down through generations. And why I believe that Jesus purposely delayed to go to Lazarus and purposely with him in the tomb. He did not go while he was still alive and sick, but dead. And after the third day, even with his own death. No surprise or accident, the Lord planned it in this way. Because this would take away any chances. Because if he did, it's, we've had this before, and the body just reconnected with it, that wouldn't be a miracle. See, we're going to go past the point of no return, and they couldn't be dismissed. May have been in the past where they thought someone had died and then a change. Let's pick up with verse 22. But also some women among us amazed us. When they were at the tomb early in the morning and did not find his body, they came saying that they had also seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just exactly as the women also had said, but him they did not see. And he said to them, O foolish men, and slow of heart to believe in all that the prophets have spoken. And that's with an explanation point. So Jesus is really emphatically saying, you're so hard to believe what has been passed down for generations. Verse 26, was it not necessary for the Christ to suffer these things and to enter into his glory? Then beginning with Moses and with all the prophets, he explained to them the things concerning himself in all the scriptures. That's why he says, you Pharisees, if you believe Moses, you'd believe in me, because Moses spoke of me. And that was on another occasion. Verse 28, and they approached the village where they were going, and he acted as they were going farther. But they urged him, saying, stay with us, for it is getting toward evening, and the day is now nearly over. So he went in to stay with them. When he reclined at the table with them, he took the bread, blessed it, and breaking them, now he said to them, These are my words which I spoke to you while I was still with you, that all the things which are written about me in the law of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms must be fulfilled. Then he opened their minds to understand the Scriptures. And he said to them, Thus it is written, that the Christ would suffer and rise again from the dead on the third day, and the repentance for forgiveness of sins would be proclaimed in his name to all the nations, beginning from Jerusalem. You are witnesses of these things. And behold, I am sending forth the promise of my Father upon you. But you are to stay in the city until you are clothed with power from on high. Funny how we hear him say that they are to stay in the city and wait for him, when some of the disciples, we know that we just preached on a lesson about a week or so ago, Peter and his fishing group at the helm says, I'm going fishing. And some of the others said that we will go with you. I want you to stay, and this is going to happen. The fishers of men, Peter a little bit slower than most, I guess. This is an incredible eyewitness account that saw the resurrected Jesus and even had troubles with accepting it. And who wouldn't? Hard to witness in person, even with the disciples. So the question for us remains is, do you believe that Jesus truly was raised from the dead? Because all of that belief and that faith rests on the answer to that question. And some still have troubles with that. But it's where we find hope. If he has been raised, then we shall be raised. Romans 8:11 starts with that promise to us. Paul gives us the best account in a chapter. You can go read it at home concerning the promise of erection in 1 Corinthians 15 in the resurrection. It's an incredible outlay there, and I won't go for it for time purposes. And if you don't believe it then, how patient or impatient are we with others that say that they can't believe it? See, Jesus was. Jesus showed, even though he said what he said with an explanation point, still was willing to work with them. We should know that if they have doubts, we should understand that there are people today that will even have doubts, just like Jesus did in this example. We are here to proclaim, just like many did, that he died, was buried, and rose again, so that we might have hope. Now let's pick up with verse 30. He began giving it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to one another, Were not our hearts burning with us while he was speaking to us on the road, while he was explaining the Scriptures to us? And they got up the very hour and returned to Jerusalem, and found gathered together the 11 and those who were with them, saying, The Lord has really risen and appeared to Simon. They began to relate their experiences on the road and how he had recognized them by breaking of the bread. While they were telling these things, he himself stood in the midst and said to them, Peace be to you. But they were startled and frightened, and they thought they were seeing a spirit. Again, thought they were seeing a ghost. And he said to them, Why are you troubled? And why does your doubts arise in your hearts about a resurrected body? Now, he's going to go through the senses thing with them too. Notice Jesus, it's not hard on them for having doubts. He wonders why that they're struggling with this, since the word has been told, foretold, pre-told. He told them the Scriptures were to prepare them for this one-day occurrence. But instead of being impatient with them, notice he doesn't say, You fools, why can't you believe? Why am I wasting my time with you? And leaves them to be by themselves. Can't you still get it? No, instead he says, You want proof? Verse 39. See my hands and my feet, that it is I, myself? Touch me and see. For a spirit does not have flesh and bones as you see that I have. Very interesting. A resurrected body would be able to be touched. It wouldn't be a ghost. Verse 40, and when he had said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. And while they still could not believe, still not. I mean, seeing should be believing, but when they still could not believe it because of their joy and amazement, he kind of says, okay, I'm back in the flesh. You can see me, you can touch me, see my scars, and if that will still not work still not work for you, have you anything here to eat? Why? Well, we know ghosts don't eat, even though, have you fed your ghosts lately? I mean, I felt a presence. They've come in. Did they come and make themselves a snack? Did they open up the fridge? And no, we know they don't eat. So he even goes and plays along with him too. He says, well, do you have anything to eat? I mean, this resurrected body, Jesus raised from the dead, would and could eat. Spirits don't have flesh and bone. And spirits can't eat our food, right? That's what they would surmise. Verse 42, they gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it, and he ate it before them. That is an incredible start to what would be a disbelief system. If you think about all of what they had seen up to this point, to get to this point of them being able to see, touch, and then see him actually eat food. Now, why do I bring all of this part up? Well, because the fact is what I said in the very beginning, that we all believe with a faith that Jesus rose from the dead. At what point do we have to have proof and further proof? And you got to be very leery and very careful, because the Pharisees looked for a greater sign. You know, it says, all of these things were written. So what? So that you might believe. He appeared to some 300 at one time, including the 11, not just an elite few, to dispel any notion that the stone was rolled away by a bunch of thieves to take the body and say that he was resurrected, just to say that this went on. But we still have people with disbelief. And that's all right, as long as we still encouraging them to keep searching, to keep finding, to keep looking. And that's what Jesus did in these instances. Sure, we can have a doubt of a resurrection, but it can also be taken care of with plenty of scriptures to know that these things are true. Because they would have been dispelled in a notion, if you don't think the Pharisees were out to disprove all of this and discredit as many as they could. They went to far degrees in the same thing about a blind person trying to interrogate the parents, even almost really surmising that they were liars themselves. But it could not be stopped. The resurrected Jesus is why we are here today, and why we have, and in that Romans states, why we have hope. Because if he was truly raised in a resurrected body from the dead, then we too will raise in like manner. And the same thing as when we were buried with him in baptism, the same thing. Same images. We were buried and we arise, and we walk in newness of life. We give an opportunity that we give to each and every one, that if we can pray with you and for you on maybe a subject that lays heavy on your heart. Maybe you've never obeyed the gospel and would like to have an opportunity, and that will not go unnoticed, that say everything is ready and everything is prepared. Or maybe you just have something that you would like to just have extra prayers and support from. Our congregation here would love to have the opportunity to do that. Whatever your need is, if you'll come now and make it known as we stand and as we sing.